हमारे साथ जुड़े रहने के लिए हमारे YouTube चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें।
चिदंबरम जी बोल रहे यस दे हैव नोटेड आ जाओ कमिंग रेडी सर
Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir, I wish I was speaking on the budget in happier circumstances.
प्लीज बीच में इंटरप्ट ना करें
Yeah, I understand.
That's okay. We were not protesting. We were pointing out.
We're not saying anything. We are not saying anything, Murli. No, not necessarily.
To the washroom. To the washroom.
Sir, I wish I was speaking under happier circumstances. I'm not unhappy only because India lost the cricket match yesterday. I'm unhappy, in fact, I'm very unhappy that democracy is suffering a blow every day. What we have seen in Karnataka, what we are seeing in Goa, may appear to be political upmanship, but I think it has a very damaging effect on the economy. Foreign investors, rating agencies, international organizations do not read Indian newspapers and do not watch the tamed Indian television channels. What they hear, what they read about political instability and political chicanery and political upmanship will have an impact on the economy. I only wish that the ruling party takes note of this. If they think they are advancing their political goals, I think at the same time they are doing a great disservice to the economic goals of this country. I sincerely appeal to them to respect democracy. What has happened in the last 2 days has gravely damaged democracy, and more such incidents will completely damage the democratic framework of this country. I condemn what has happened in Karnataka. I condemn what has happened in Goa, not because it's a political event alone, but because it has a very damaging impact on the economy. Sir, I wish to compliment the Finance Minister. பட்டங்கள் ஆழ்வதும் சட்டங்கள் செய்வதும் பாரினில் பெண்கள் நடத்த வந்தோம் எட்டும் அறிவினில் ஆணுக்கிங்கே பெண் இழைப்பில்லை என்று கும்மியடி. This is Bharatiya. Bharatiya spoke about gender equality at the turn of the 20th century, in the early 20th century. And I'm very happy that she has had the distinguished privilege of being the first woman finance minister of India. And I may also add, I'm doubly happy that she is from Tamil Nadu. Having said that,
प्लीज
having said that, I want to ask the Finance Minister, what is her macroeconomic view of the economy? Usually, one gleans it from reading the budget speech. There is a statement on the government's macroeconomic view of the world economy, and there is a statement on the government's macroeconomic view and the outlook for the Indian economy. Unfortunately, that is absent in the budget speech. In fact, it is the first budget speech which does not give in the speech the numbers of total revenue, total expenditure, the fiscal deficit, the revenue deficit, the additional resource mobilization, what we call ARM, or the tax concessions which have been given away to sections of the people. I can't recall a budget speech, and I'm sure the Finance Ministry's officers cannot dig up another budget speech which is so bereft of macroeconomic data. You can always say, well, it is there in the annexure, it is there in the budget documents. But the budget documents are not accessible to the millions of people of this country. People who are listening and watching the Finance Minister on television, listening to her on radio, deserve to know what are these broad numbers, deserve to know what is being allocated for defense, deserve to know what is being allocated for women, scheduled castes, minorities, for health, for Maganrega, for the midday meal scheme. Whatever be, I would humbly request the Finance Minister to eschew this practice in future and make a speech that is self-explanatory and self-contained, so we have an idea of what the government's view on the macroeconomy is. When we come to the GDP, we are perplexed. It's true that the Finance Minister appeared to give a very weak explanation yesterday in the other house. Let me give you my take on that. The GDP number for 2019-20 is the same, both in the budget documents and in the economic survey. But the calculation of GDP for the year that went by is very different. According to the budget documents, it's 1,88,40,000. According to the Controller of Government Accounts, it's 1,90,29,000. You can always explain it away by saying, whatever be the GDP for the year that went by, we are agreed on the GDP for the new year, 2019-20. But that's not the issue. The issue is, what is your growth projection? According to the budget documents, the growth projection is 8%. But if you take the CGA's numbers, the growth projection is only 7%. It makes a big difference. 7% and 8% are simply not different only by 1%. 7% and 8% make a huge difference, and I'm perplexed that the government, that is the Chief Economic Advisor, the Controller of Government Accounts, and the Finance Minister, cannot present a unified picture of what will be the growth rate in 2019-20. If the government does not know, or the government speaks in different voices on the growth rate, what are the people to conclude? Be that as it may, sir, whatever be the growth rate, and I'll come to it a little later, 7% or 8%, how do you plan to sustain this growth rate or increase the growth rate? We have repeatedly said, and the Finance Minister says it in paragraph 9 and paragraph 24 of our budget speech, that we need to do structural reforms. Now, this is a very interesting phrase. Everybody says structural reforms. But what are structural reforms? Every reform is not a structural reform. In fact, every change is not a reform. Every minor change at the margins is not reform. You have to do structural reforms. The speech recognizes it in two places. But I ask myself, show me one structural reform in the entire budget speech. There is not one. If you ask me what are structural reforms, I wrote a column once saying, in all the last 20 or 25 years, I think we've had only 11 major structural reforms. Dr. Saab is not here, but the bulk of them are attributable to Dr. Manmohan Singh. Those are structural reforms. When we took the Red Book for import and export and made a bonfire of it, that is structural reform. When we abolished licensing, that is structural reform. When we said FARA will go, exchange control will go, and the rupee will find its market rate, that was structural reform. Equivalent to that, where is the structural reform? It's not enough to say structural reforms, you must do structural reforms. And structural reforms requires disruption. You'll have to disrupt the status quo and do bold structural reforms. That alone will accelerate our development. And when I come to numbers a little later, I'll tell you the difference between doing structural reforms and not doing structural reforms. I'm afraid, sir, in this budget speech, there are no structural reforms. In the budget documents, there is no indication of any structural reform. And I'm afraid the result will be that the economy will be a status quoist economy, ambling along at this pace of about 6.5% or 6.8%, which is not good for this country and certainly not good for those who are at the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom 20%. Sir, the crucial question is, the economic survey says this, the finance minister says this, that investment is the key to growth. There are 4 engines of growth: public expenditure, domestic consumption, exports. The only engine which was firing was domestic consumption. Unfortunately, even that engine seems to be sputtering now. The economic advisor says investment is the key and exports are the key. I'll come to exports a little later. Investment is the key. Investment needs money. You can either have resources raised domestically or you can get FDI. Now let's take resources raised domestically. What are the resources that you plan to raise domestically? The gross fixed capital formation was stagnant for 3 years at 28.5. In 2018-19, if you do the calculation, you will find the GFCF improved to 29.5. At one point of time, it was 34.5. It fell 6%, now fallen 5%. So what have you in the budget to say that domestic savings will increase, which will give an impetus to investment? If domestic savings are going to remain at 29.5%, where is the additional money going to come to spur investment? I'm afraid there's nothing in this budget that will improve domestic savings. In particular, nothing in this budget that will improve household savings. Who saves? There's the middle class which saves. And what have you done to the middle class? Is there anything in this budget that will enthuse the middle class to save more? You have taxed long-term capital gains. You have now taxed buyback of shares. About the super rich, which is a separate issue, you've increased their tax rate, but given no further relief to the middle class than what the interim budget gave. So where is the incentive for middle class to save more? And if household savings don't improve, domestic savings will not rise. If domestic savings do not rise, domestic investment will not rise. If domestic investment does not rise, the gross fixed capital formation will remain at about 29.5 or 30. If it remains at 29.5 or 30, how will you get 8% growth? Please teach me I'm willing to be a student if the finance minister will be a teacher. I believe there was some debate about teacher and student in the other house. I'm willing to be a student. Let the finance minister be a teacher and tell me how will growth rise if domestic investment and GFCF remains at about 30. Now let's come to FDI. The budget speech says that FDI was 64.37 billion US dollars. She's right, but she forgot to mention it is gross FDI. Gross FDI was 64.375 billion last year. Net FDI was only 44 billion. So we should be absolutely transparent. She should have mentioned either both figures or she should have added the word gross to describe the FDI. Now, FDI has obvious limits. FDI is not in her control, not in anyone's control. FDI is controlled by the macroeconomy of the world. If US interest rates rise, if oil prices rise, if consumption rises in China, a variety of factors over which nobody has got control. So you can't rely only on FDI. The best way to boost investment rate is to boost domestic investment. And the best way to boost domestic investment is to boost domestic savings. The best way to boost domestic savings is to boost household savings. There is nothing, I repeat, there is nothing in this budget that will increase household savings. So, then we come to revenues. I've always held that this government loves to tax and spend. But last time that policy became a cropper. Unfortunately, as against budget estimates for 2018-19, the revenue loss was 1,60,000 crore. The revenues just simply did not come. One of the reasons is growth faltered. There are many other reasons. I don't have the time, my colleagues will. Now let's look at the budget estimates under the 6 major taxes. Corporation tax, income tax, customs, excise, service tax, GST. The estimate was, for the year that went by, 22,42,833 crore. What did you actually collect? 19,67,187. When you work out net to center, you will find that as against an estimate of 14,84,406, which was there in the interim budget revised estimates presented in February, you actually collected, according to the Controller of Government Accounts, only 13,16,951. You lost 1,60,000 crore. And now again, despite that experience, what are you projecting? Last year, income tax collections increased by 7.1%. For the new year, the finance minister is projecting income tax collection will rise by 23.25%. If you achieve that, you will rank with the Olympian pole vaulter. From 7.1%, you will rise to 23.25%. Customs was negative by 8.6%. Projection is plus 32%.
आप देख रहे हैं नेट्रिक न्यूज, साहस सच कहने का।